Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's Dina Kalmeta here. And for today's news, I first want to talk about Israel and the Abraham Accords. It's being reported that President Trump is eyeing bringing Azerbaijan and Central Asian nations into the Abraham Accords. So in other words, expanding the Abraham Accords in hopes of deepening the existing ties with Israel. Now, Azerbaijan and every country in Central Asia, by contrast, already have long-standing relations with Israel, meaning that an expansion of the Accords to include them would be largely symbolic, focusing on strengthening ties in areas like trade and military cooperation. Such an expansion would reflect Trump's openness to pacts that are less ambitious than his administration's goals to convince regional heavyweight Saudi Arabia to restore ties with Israel. But the kingdom has repeatedly said it would not recognize Israel without steps towards an Israeli recognition of a Palestinian state. Now, the original Abraham Accords, inked between Israel and United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, were centered on restoration of ties. Now, I've always believed that this Abraham Accords is actually the template for the peace covenant that we hear in Daniel 9:27 that the Antichrist will confirm. In the meantime, let's talk about Russia. Russia stated on Tuesday that they no longer have any restrictions on deploying previously banned types of conventional and nuclear missiles, and they are vowing to take appropriate measures if necessary. Moscow's foreign ministry has said in a statement on Monday that it no longer considers itself bound by previous restrictions on U.S. and Russian missiles with a range between 500 and 5,500 kilometers. Why does this matter? Because former President Ronald Reagan and former Soviet Union Gorbachev signed an agreement in 1987 known as the INF, or the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, which banned nuclear and conventional missiles able to strike between these distances. This treaty is no longer in force and does not bind either state. Now, it's also being reported by Newsweek that the United States sent a nuke sniffer towards Russia after the nuclear warning issued. The aircraft, identified by the call sign Cobra 29, circled around the Barents Sea, north of Murmansk and west of the Russian Arctic before returning to the UK almost 14 hours later. The nuclear sniffer that collects data from the atmosphere with the explicit purpose of supporting a 1963 nuclear treaty, the agreement between the US and the Soviet Union and the UK banned nuclear testing in the atmosphere. The aircraft can detect radioactive clouds in real time. The US and the UK have sent surveillance aircraft on multiple flights up to this particular region in recent weeks. Analysts tracking the flight online said it could indicate that Russia may soon carry out tests of its 9M7030 Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile. So basically, they're expecting Russia to do another nuclear test. So we go and we send out our nuke sniffer. In the meantime, Express News is reporting that Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has called upon President Trump to show restraint when making what the Kremlin described as nuclear rhetoric following a tense exchange between Trump and former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. Peskov told a Russian media outlet that Russia is very attentive to the topic of nuclear non-proliferation, and we believe that everyone should be very, very cautious with nuclear rhetoric. Peskov's remarks emerged as a Russian publication cautioned that the pair were heading for a head-on collision, stating that the Trump locomotive and the Putin locomotive are speeding towards each other, and neither is about to turn off or stop and reverse. So obviously this goes back to comments made by the former Russian president, and President Trump in response sent 2 nuclear submarines in Russia's backyard. So kind of tense. What started out as a pretty smooth year between Russia and the United States is flipping now. And who is coming to the rescue? Well, All Israel News is reporting that amid the growing tensions, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to mediate between the Trump administration and the Russian presidents. The report stated that while some of Netanyahu's recent phone calls to Putin had been covered by the media, others were held without informing the public, and their contents have remained confidential. The two leaders spoke with with one another on Sunday, according to the Prime Minister's office and according to the Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov. The previous week, the two leaders also held a conversation with their offices, confirming that Syria and Iran were among the topics discussed. Now, it remains unclear whether the U.S. has reached out to Netanyahu with a request to mediate or whether this is an Israeli initiative. So what does this mean as far as prophecy is concerned? Well, we are in the season of wars and rumors of wars spoken about by Jesus in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We see a peace treaty possibly expanding with the Abraham Accords. We see tensions between the United States and Russia, with Israel, very interestingly, now in the middle. And I can go on and talk about some other nations, but for the sake of time, I'd like to move on to another birth pain that's in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and that is earthquakes. The most important news, written by Michael Schneider, is asking the question, why have there been so many large earthquakes in recent weeks? This is something that people on social media are really buzzing about right now. And I am certainly glad that they are buzzing about it, because what we have been witnessing is not even close to normal. We really are in the early stages of an extremely apocalyptic chapter in human history, and people need to hear about it. It is being claimed that there were 396 earthquakes of at least a magnitude 5.0 during a recent 30-day period. And this claim is being heavily circulated on multiple social media platforms. He goes on to say, I want to independently verify that this figure was accurate. What I discovered was extremely alarming. He says he went to a volcano discovery, and these are the latest numbers that are being given for the past 30 days. 1 quake above a magnitude of an 8, 4 quakes between 7 and 8, 33 quakes between 6 and 7, 456 quakes between a 5 and a 6, 1,809 quakes between a 4 and a 5, 5,617 quakes between a 3 and a 4, 10,512 quakes between a 2 and a 3, and 33,959 quakes below 2 that people do not normally feel. If these numbers are accurate, things are even worse than the claims that they are being made on social media. If you add together the top 4 lines, it gives you a grand total of 494 earthquakes of at least 5.0 within the past 30 days. Nearly 500 earthquakes of at least a 5.0 in a 30-day period is extremely unusual. So he goes to ask Google AI what is going on. And this is what it said. According to the USGS, the Earth experiences an average of 1,300 to 1,500 earthquakes at 5+ annually. This translates to approximately 110 to 125 earthquakes of that magnitude per month. Therefore, while the reported 396 5+ earthquakes in the last 30 days is significantly higher than the average, it is important to note that global earthquake activity tends to cluster, meaning there can be periods of higher activity followed by calmer periods, still within the realm of normal geophysical variation. So hopefully things will start to calm down in the near future, but for now, large earthquakes continue to hit diverse locations all over the globe. For example, the Dominican Republic was just hammered by a 5.7 earthquake. Here in the United States, New York and Jersey just hit by an unusual earthquake for a second consecutive day. A 2.7 rattled the tri-state area around midday on Tuesday. The epicenter was located in Hillsdale, New Jersey, about 20 miles north of Manhattan. This is roughly the same area as a 3.0 that struck New Jersey over the past weekend. On July 22nd, a 2.0 was measured near Roundoff, New Jersey. Meanwhile, we have the year of the fire that has continued. A fire in California is now out of control. The Gifford fire has already exploded to 50,000 plus acres, forcing mass evacuations in Santa Barbara and St. Louis. The flames apparently are out of control. Smoke is choking the sky from California all the way to Las Vegas. Over 1,000 boots on the ground, and there's barely been any containment. According to an update as of yesterday that was just published by ABC News, the Gifford fire has now grown to over 72,000 acres, and it is just 3% contained. If the Gifford fire reaches 100,000 acres, it will be considered to be a megafire. Of course, the fire that has been raging in the Grand Canyon National Park for a month is already considered to be a megafire, and it just keeps getting larger. Up in Canada, hundreds of wildfires are prompting air quality alerts in quite a few northern U.S. states. And despite all of our advanced technology, wildfires are raging out of control all over North America. And the month of August is only just beginning. So definitely an uptick in earthquake activity, as noted, as I mentioned earlier in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So what do fires have to do with end times prophecy? Well, if we look at the books of Acts and Joel, God says, "And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come." So, blood and fire and pillars of smoke can definitely refer to wildfires, extreme wildfires, and also volcanoes. But with these verses in mind, and also Luke 21:25, God will show signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars. There's a lot of activity happening with the moon in the next 30 days or so. Just on August 4th, there was a rare planetary alignment featuring Mercury, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, all appearing within the same celestial line. On August 9th, there'll be a full moon. This moon will be called the Sturgeon moon. After that, on the 12th and 13th of August, there will be the peak of the Perseid meteor shower, where you can spot up to 50 to 70 meteors per hour if you're in a darkened area. On August 23rd, there will be a special event called the Black Moon, defined as the third new moon in a season that has 4 new moons. And on September 7th, a total lunar eclipse will be visible across parts of the world, including Australia, Asia, Africa, and Europe. So definitely signs in the heavens and signs in the moon. And speaking of the moon, it is being reported that the United States is accelerating plans to build a nuclear reactor on the moon, with U.S. Transportation Secretary and Acting NASA Director Sean Duffy set to unveil the initiative, according to Politico. While NASA had already explored the idea of lunar nuclear power, the new directive pushes for a firm timeline and signals urgency, despite the agency facing significant budget cuts. The project aims to establish a 100-kilowatt reactor by 2030, a step up from previous research into a smaller 40-kilowatt model, and is seen as crucial for sustained astronaut presence on the moon. The directive warns that whichever nation lands a reactor first could potentially declare a keep-out zone, a strategic move that might limit U.S. access, reflecting growing concern over China-Russia space alliance. Alongside the lunar reactor push, Duffy is also calling for an accelerated replacement of the aging International Space Station. Both efforts are intended to reignite American dominance in space exploration, especially as rival nations make swift advances towards lunar and Martian missions. So it's basically become a fight for the moon between Russia, China, and the United States. So very interesting news there. Could be a possibility if they were able to get access to that moon, why we would see some devastating signs on the moon in scripture. Just a thought to think about. But I do want to leave you guys with some good news and a prophecy that we are watching come to pass in real time. Jesus said that the gospel would be preached worldwide. Now, I live near Portland, and our motto for Portland is Keep Portland Weird. It's more than a slogan, it's a worldview. You'll find it spray painted on walls, emblazoned on coffee mugs, and proudly worn like a badge of honor by some locals. It's shorthand for everything Portland prides itself on: progressive values, culture, radical individualism, and even open hostility to traditional faith. But this past weekend, something happened that wasn't just weird. It was miraculous. In a city long considered a spiritual wasteland, the report goes on to say, the gospel came roaring to life. More than 35,000 people packed the Moda Center for the PTX Crusade hosted by Athey Creek Church. And in 2 days, in a place where Christians are now outnumbered by the religiously unaffiliated, 3,200 people made decisions for Christ. Some were attendees, others were security guards. Even an elevator operator surrendered his life to Jesus. That's not a headline from Alabama or Texas. That is Portland, Oregon. For many, it felt like the impossible had happened. Revival of one of America's most secular, liberal, and woke cities. Portland has become a case study in post-Christian America. In the latest Pew research of 23 and 24, religiously unaffiliated individuals now outnumber Christians in the Portland, Vancouver metro area. And that's not new. A 2015 Public Religion Research Institute survey ranked Portland the most religiously unaffiliated city in the nation. Churches have closed, drug use has soared, crime is up, and depression is rampant. The city's culture preaches liberation from all moral restraints, but the results have been anything but freeing. That's why this crusade was so significant. Thousands didn't show up for a concert or a motivational talk. They came because they were hungry, empty, and searching. The pre-registration maxed out so quickly that they had to add an additional session. The arena overflowed with volunteers, over 4,000 of them. And the atmosphere was apparently electric, not with emotion, but with expectation. Portland didn't need politics. It needed hope, and hope showed up. And the report goes on to other miraculous revivals per se. But this is also prophecy. Jesus said in Matthew 24:14, "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." So pretty cool thing to see this here in the city where I used to work and live. But with all of that said, those are your headlines for today. Please do leave your comments below this video. I'd love to hear from all of you. Come and visit us on our social media pages as well as my website at www.cww7news.com. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, God bless and stay safe.